Welcome back. Hey everybody, I'm Dan Haggerty. This is In Depth. If you haven't seen one of my segments here before, here's the deal. We discuss the news. You email me at dan@WRAL.com, or you find me on social media and you become part of the discussion, whatever we're talking about. If you have seen one of my segments before, you know that I mean it, that I want to hear from you. I'm not really in the business at talking at people. I want to hear what you have to say. So if you have something to contribute, if you have an opinion on the way we're doing the news, on my coverage, let me hear it and we'll balance it out. I don't really do breaking news. I don't do house fires or car crashes or random shootings. And if something tragic happens, we don't do a quick recap and move on to another story or talk about weather. We discuss it. We live with it for a little while, even if those discussions are difficult or uncomfortable, which brings me to tonight's In Depth. About an hour ago, a little more, I met with 11 people, parents and kids and professionals, to talk about suicide and youth mental health. All this week, I'm going to be sharing bits of that discussion and then listening for some of your feedback and questions and things you might have to say. You may already know why we are tackling this topic now. If you watched the news last week, you certainly know, because we covered one of the most tragic stories I can remember, when an 8th grade boy died by suicide at his school in Wendell. You see him on your screen, 13 years old. Austin Pendergrass was his name. His family called him, quote, an amazing little boy. Did you hear that? Not the amazing part, the little boy part. You've seen the statistics on the news. Suicide is now the leading cause of death for 10 to 14-year-olds. Number one. The suicide rate for 2020 was the highest in a decade. Now, this is an issue that we have covered for months, actually, in depth, for months on WRAL. The WRAL Doc Unit set out to investigate the pandemic's lasting impact on kids and their mental health. Here's a bit of that coverage.
I definitely experienced anxiety. I wasn't sure who I was anymore, so I just didn't know how I was gonna reintegrate myself into the community. I didn't know how it was all gonna work.
I worry that we're gonna all be socially awkward and we aren't really gonna know who we are or where we fit in, and that might lead to a whole new road of mental health issues for the future.
Across the state, we're hearing from parents, we're hearing from pediatricians, sort of skyrocketing numbers of children who have anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and we simply don't have the services in place to care for the children.
Before, maybe it was one child in the classroom, 1 in 20 would have something that really rose to the level of a clinical symptom, and now it's 1 in 5. And so that I think that scale is hard for us to understand and to sit with.
A lot of the experts we talked to said anxiety and depression really increased among young people, like 1 in 5. Did you experience that? And if so, what was that like?
I experienced a lot of anxiety during the pandemic.
Yes, I was diagnosed before the pandemic though.
I definitely deal with anxiety.
Yeah, I am actually diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and I have to take medication for it. And I think that I started with my medication when COVID hit, because it was pretty manageable until the point when COVID hit, and that's when everything kind of just went downhill from there.
And I became somewhat depressed. I just lying around in bed and just being completely alone became normal for me, and anxiety was something that became an issue.
Definitely. So everything kind of had like a gray shade on it.
I think anxiety and depression and mental health, it comes from being alone and in your head and by yourself. And in the pandemic, that's like a physical, real representation of how that is in your head.
What did it feel like having anxiety during the pandemic?
It was just kind of like this weight that was on you, and you didn't know how to lift it.
Dread all the time, and stomach aches and headaches and sweaty palms, and
that sort of like the general feeling of like just always feeling a little bit sick, which is scary during a pandemic.
It was probably there before the pandemic, but the pandemic really made me grapple with how I was feeling.
I think that not all of that came from the pandemic. I think it just pulled back the curtain. I think that there has always been anxiety and depression in teens, and that first the stigma is starting to come off, and that kind of aligned with the timing.
COVID numbers are going down. Is this going to go away?
No. It could be a lifetime thing that a lot of these kids are going to be facing.
You can watch the entire documentary right now on the WRAL YouTube page. Also, again, we are going to be talking with families and about how parents can best help their kids all week right here at 7 o'clock on WRAL. If you have questions and you'd like us to answer them, try and find solutions for you, please email me at dan@WRAL.com.